going to be a video that shows you kind of the basics on how to implement a login system into your FileMaker solution. Certainly, if you download these files, these starter files from our website, you'll have all of this code. But yeah, let's get started. So basically what I've got here that I'm starting with is I've got a user screen, or I apologize, a users table. Okay. If we go to our managed database, you can see it maybe a little bit better. So I have a users table and a login table. Okay. And within my users table, I have, just a number of fields. You'll probably have more or less or whatever, but it's just basic fields to information about your users, each user having that information there. And then you've got a login field. And on the login, what I did is I created a couple of fields here. Now I name them with a G because I am storing these as global data fields. So basically the way these work is if you create a field and go to storage, you can check this box to make it a global storage field. That way, regardless of which record you're on in that table, you're seeing the same value. That's useful if you just need to store values temporarily. So that's what I do is I will typically use a couple of global fields there, and that's what I've got set up right now. Okay, now over in my users table, I've just got a real basic system here where I've got, first name, last name, username, and then their password. Now, typically in the password, you wouldn't actually display that here, but during my build stage and testing stages, I will usually display that for ease of development. Now, over here on the login screen, what we're going to do is we're going to add those two fields, okay, just so that we can see them. And then we're going to create a button and create a way to log in with that. Okay. So first thing I want to do is I want to add those fields. I'm going to switch over here to layout mode, and I'm going to add those fields, one for username, and then I'll drag that down and I'll add password. Okay, next thing I want to do is I want to add a button. Okay, I'm going to add a button to my layout. This button is basically just going to say login. Okay, right now it's going to do nothing, but we're going to create a script here in just a moment for it to do. So if we go back to browse mode, you'll see I have my two fields here, nothing in them. Now again, the way a global field works is if you did have something in here like B. Smith, and right now we have one record. If we had multiple records, if I created a new record, you go to every record in the database and it would have the same value. And that's useful if you don't know what record you're currently going to be on whenever the user enters the value, then it's good to use a global just temporarily. Okay, so now we're going to create our login script. Very quickly, before we create a login script, one thing we do need to do is we need to create a relationship between these two tables. Okay, so we're going to go to Manage, Database, Relationships, and here's my login table that we're looking at right now, and then here's my users table. So what I want to do is I want to create a relationship between my users, I apologize, between my login and my users. What I want to do is create that relationship using the username. So when the G username, the global username, the temporary one, equals the username in the database, then that relationship is complete and functional. Okay, so this creates my window from one database into the other. Okay, so now that I've got that created, I can go and I can start working on my script. So I'm going to create a new script, I'll just call this login. Okay, and my script is going to go through the process of presenting the user with a dialog, asking them to enter information, and then checking that against the database. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show them a dialog. So I'm going to use this custom dialog function, click on that, and then I can specify what it's going to be. And I'm just going to call the dialog login. And here I'll ask the user to please enter a username and password. Okay, I'm going to take away the second button to where I only have one button for right now. Okay, and then I'm going to define my input fields on that login dialog. So my first field that I'm going to ask them to enter into is gusername. Okay, my second one is going to be gpassword. On gpassword, on your final solution, you'll probably want to click this so that as they're typing in characters, you see a dot. But for right now, I'm going to leave that unchecked. All right, so then that dialog will pop up, ask them to enter that information. Okay, I'm going to hit save. We're going to jump back over here to our layout and go into layout mode, select this button that we made. If we double click it, then we can change this from do nothing when it's clicked to perform a script, and we want it to perform the login script. Okay, once you've done that, we can go back into browse mode, test it real quick, make sure. Sure enough, it did prompt us. Now, there's no label, so we're going to go ahead and add that label in there and then continue with our other stuff. Okay, so if we go back to the script workspace, edit this, input fields, here's our label. So here we will say username, and here we'll say password. Okay, so the user has been presented with a dialog. Once they click OK, it moves to the next step of the script. The first step of this script needs to be an if statement. So we're going to start testing to make sure data is good. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check to make sure that what they entered as a username matches a username in our user table. So I am going to click here, and I'm going to say, okay, my calculation that I'm actually curious about here is username, okay, equals, and then choose the other table, okay, and username. Okay, so that is my test. If that, the temporary username, equals the user's username, then do this code. Else, do this code. Now I haven't entered code in there yet, but that's what it's going to do. Okay, so we can test that real quick. We can add a custom dialog. I'm going to add it right there. And I'm just going to say, attention, there is a matching user. I don't really need a cancel button. This is just for my own testing. And I'm going to duplicate that and put it here and say there is not a matching. So again, my logic is if this equals a record over there, then say there's a matching one. Otherwise, say there's not. So let's save this and let's run it. Okay, I know that one of my records over there in the other table is B. Smith. So I'm going to type in B. Smith, and I'm going to type in a password, but it's not going to do anything with this password. And I do it, and it says there is a matching username. Now let's try it again with a incorrect value. So let's try B. Thompson. There's no record over there for B. Thompson, so it ought to say there's not. Okay, so it is working as far as matching up a username. So that's good. So let's go back to our script workspace. So if there is a matching, if it matches, then what we want to do at this point is do another if statement, because this statement is going to check to make sure the password field matches. So what we do is we say if gpassword equals the password over here. Okay, so it's saying if that equals that, then do some more code. So what I'm going to do, since I already know this one works, I'm going to repurpose this dialog. And I'm going to say password is correct. And here I'm running a test. So this is what it runs if the test is true. If the test is false, I always like to have something that it does if it's false. So I'm going to say password is wrong. That way I can quickly test as I go. So I can log in, I click OK, there's not a matching username, done. But if I click login and I do some bsmith, then it's going to check, it's going to see that there is a bsmith, and then it's going to check my password against the password in the user table. And it will say that the password is wrong, which is good because the password for bsmith is 2222. So let's try it again with 2222. And voila, it says the password is correct. So as you can imagine, right there is your basis for this login dialog. However, there's a lot more we need to do. We need to add some more error checking and so forth. Okay, so if the password is correct, then what are we going to do? Well, in this particular case, what I want to do is I want to take us to another layout. So here I am going to add in go to layout, and I'm going to choose the logged in layout. It's just another layout that I have created. So that's where it's going to take us. Otherwise, it's going to say password is wrong. Okay. The next thing I want to do also is I want to clear out those fields. Okay. What do I mean by that? Let me save this. These are my temporary fields, and they're going to stay here on the layout, but we want to clear them out each time that we do our run this script. Since there are several scenarios here by which we might want to clear them out rather than duplicating code, I'm going to suggest that we create another script, and I'm just going to call it reset globals. And what this script is going to do is it's going to clear the username. I'm going to duplicate this and clear the password. And then I'm going to, the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to commit the records. Okay, so those are the three things that that script is going to do. Now if I go back to my login script, once we go over there to that screen, great, everything's great, but what we want to do right before we jump over there to that screen is run that script. Okay, so the way that we do that is we choose this perform script step. I'm going to put it right above that, and I'm going to run the reset globals. Okay, if the password is wrong, we also want to reset the globals. Okay, so I can duplicate that and I can run it right there, because by this point it will have already decided that that's wrong. Okay, and then if the original thing that I ran it on is wrong, we want to reset those globals there too. So This just gives you just a little bit of extra leverage on how to clear that stuff out. So let's test this. So ignore this for right now. In fact, we can just clear these out. And we're going to click Login. So I'll do bsmith, and I'm going to use an incorrect password. And you'll see password is wrong. You may have noticed this flash, and that's because they appeared there for a second until they got cleared out by that script while the thing was running. But I'll show you what we do about that here in just a moment. Let's run it again. This time we're going to enter the correct data. Okay, it took me to the screen, and now I can return to login, and they're cleared out again. Okay, so in any case, what I'm doing is I'm clearing those out right away, and then I'm proceeding with the parts of the script that I want to proceed with. Okay, so one of the last things that I usually like to do is I like to just hide these fields from the user. Doesn't make a lot of sense. I'll just get my inspector up here. It doesn't make a lot of sense for them to see these. We don't want them entering into them anyway, and we're just going to clear them right out anyway. So I usually will just set the color to be the same as my background. I'll set the border to be none, and I will even go to my section of my inspector that allows me to dictate whether or not it's usable during browse mode. See here, I can just uncheck that, and that basically locks it. So I do the same thing with this one. I'm going to lock it. I'm going to change the color to match my background, and I'm going to remove the border, and I can even go so far as to remove these labels. That way, when I go to browse mode, you can't see those fields. They're not there. They're hidden. You go to log in, you don't see those fields. Okay, if I enter the wrong stuff, okay, you still saw that flash, right? Okay, there's two things we can do about that. For one, what we didn't do here is we didn't change the text color. So this will resolve most of what we want. Okay, so let's do this again, bsmith. So I entered the wrong thing. You never saw anything happen. We're good. If I enter the correct thing, great. It took us to the correct place, and we're logged in. So this is just a real quick way of creating a login system. Now, obviously, you're going to do things differently in your system. When it is successful here at this stage, you're probably going to take us to a whole different layout, a different part of your solution. You may even run some extra scripts in here, etc. So what I typically will like to do, and like I said, if you download this this starter solution, it'll have a lot more comments like this in it, and it'll have a lot more extra information in it. But this is the basics. But usually I'll put some comments in my code, and I say username and password are correct, so do the following. And then I'll comment that again down here. But I'll say username is correct, but password is wrong. So do the following, etc. I just find that adding in these comments as I go helps me and helps anybody else who picks up my code to know what I intended this stuff to do here. So you'll find a lot of this stuff in that starter solution as well as further explanation. But this is a quick way of creating a login system. My login table I usually keep minimal, like I may not even add anything else to my login table. It's probably just always ever just going to be those two fields, and they're going to be globals, and they're going to be cleared out immediately to keep my solution as secure as possible. And the only place that I actually do anything is right here if both are correct. Uh, I'm sorry, right here if both are correct. And I would put in my instructions here, either go to this layout or run this script and do these extra things, or, you know, perhaps you have some preferences you want to go copy over and say, this is how this application should work for this user, etc. Those are all things that you could do. Some of those things have been implemented in the starter solution. One way of doing that would be to store that information in the user table. Maybe the user table itself has some preferences. And, you know, if they like the screen to be like this, or they want it to always start up to this screen, or whatever kind of preferences you might want to give them, you add fields and ways for them to select those things, and those are stored right along with their user information. Then during that login script, once it's successfully logged in, you could copy all this preference data over and set your application to those preferences for that user. And that would give them a way to have a somewhat customized uh, experience. But most importantly, it would give you a way to see what kind of permissions they have and only take them to places that where you want this particular user type to go. Maybe that's as simple as having a field called user type, and the value for this user is, you know, uh, limited versus admin user versus, you know, read only. Whatever you might want to do, you could create your own preference structure. FileMaker definitely has a lot of that kind of structure built in, and you could utilize theirs as well. But this would give you the flexibility of doing some of that yourself. But so that's the logged in. Again, this login screen though itself is really just a place to take it to where we know that the login worked. But the starter solution will have more data in it and more explanation than that. And so yeah, hopefully this was helpful, and happy coding.